Hello and welcome back to Sex, Brains and Money. I'm your host, Nikki Thomas, at the Autism Art Auction. You can hear the wonderful adulation from our live audience. And now we're going to go to our first expert on autism, Dr. John Vervaeke from the University of Toronto. Hi, John. Thanks for joining us today.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
As many of you know, this is not John's first appearance on Sex, Brains and Money. He has been here once before and did a really great segment talking about the phenomenon known as flow.
Yes.
And he's agreed to come back and join us again to talk about what's known as the salience landscape of people with autism. But first, John, why don't you tell us why autism is considered a spectrum disorder?
Right. That's a very important point, and it qualifies what I'm going to be saying. It's not the case that everybody that's diagnosed with autism presents the same set of symptoms, the same set of behaviors. There's this continuum, and there's sort of this group of people diagnosed with autism share these features, and then that overlaps with this group, and that's why it's called a spectrum. So for a long time, psychologists and cognitive scientists tried to find sort of a magic bullet approach, that there was a single phenomenon, there was a single thing you had to address to try and help ameliorate autism, but that's largely collapsed. It's now understood that that's the wrong approach. We should actually see that there's sort of a bunch of subpopulations that are joined by kind of a family resemblance together. So anything I'm going to say has to be qualified that way.
Well, it makes sense, and it's so typical of psychology to want to have one cause,
Right,
and therefore
right.
one solution,
Yep.
because it's simpler that way. But the truth is, human behavior is far too complex to narrow down
Exactly.
to one single thing. So you were going to talk about the salience landscape. Could you explain what that is for our audience?
Sure. So one of the most important things that we have to do as human beings is we have to, at a very almost automatic level, we have to screen off a lot of the information in our environment. There's lots of information here, and we have to screen some of it off. So I presume you're focusing on me right now. I'm very salient.
I'm doing my best.
I stand out for you, whereas the floor is very less salient. It's not completely outside your awareness. See, so some things stand out for you, and then other things shade off into the background. And so your brain is doing this very complex process by which it's realizing what's relevant, and that's holding your attention, you're focusing on it. And that serves as a way in which information is being integrated and organized together. So this world makes sense to you. This room makes sense to you in terms of that salience landscape.
Okay, well, that makes sense. And even though I'm not paying too much attention to the floor right now, I'm very glad that it's there, because we're on the second floor, and I'd be all the way downstairs if it wasn't there for any given reason. So, okay, so from what you're saying, it sounds like we have both a wide and a narrow sort of salience landscape.
Exactly.
And we have the capacity to narrow our focus.
Zoom in and zoom out, exactly.
Just like a camera, just like the
Exactly.
cameras are doing over here. So, well, why don't you tell us how it might be an advantage to have a salience landscape typical to a person with autism?
All right, well, let's talk about, again, a large group, again, about that spectrum disorder of people diagnosed with autism. They tend to be more zoomed in, if I can put it that way. They're more oriented towards the featural level rather than the big picture, rather than the whole. And so, in fact, when the first person who sort of labeled autism, that was one of the characteristics he noted, that people he was diagnosing as autism could pick up on very minute differences in pitch, very small differences at the featural level that most of us don't notice, because we tend to be more biased towards the big picture, getting the quick gestalt, getting the gist.
Okay, that makes. And you know what? I've always, I feel that I myself am somewhat on that autism spectrum, because I'm a very detail-oriented person. And if you present me with a paragraph, and there is one place where someone has written it like a typewriter, and there are two spaces after a period instead of one, I will zoom in on that like a hawk staring at a mouse from 50 meters above.
And this is the kind of advantage that people with autism would have. For example, we've got good evidence that many people, as I said, within this subgroup are not subject to the same kind of visual illusions that you and I are subject to. Because a lot of the visual illusions are created by our brain trying to get this big picture, this gisting. So autistic people are very good, for example, for proofreading, because we tend to not notice those featural differences. We tend to fall under certain perceptual and cognitive illusions precisely because we fill in the big picture very quickly, very fast.
Okay, so it's a good antidote against, taking things for granted and jumping to conclusions based on,
Sure.
incomplete evidence, if you will. So.
I mean, it carries with it a cost too, though. I mean, and this is Ramachandran, who's the neuroscientist who actually coined the term salience landscape, pointed out that what that tends to do, though, is it tends to fragment your world quite a bit more. It tends to make it, right, more disordered. So that's why many people with autism tend to pursue kind of routines of behavior. That's their attempt to try and stabilize this world that's not as sort of glued together the way ours is. But that again could have some aesthetic advantages because, you know, a lot of artists, you know, think about Impressionism or Pointillism, did a lot of work about trying to break out these habitual, you know, gestalts we form on things, because art's so often about seeing things, you know, again from the bottom up.
Makes sense. And, you know, that's something we're definitely making an effort to highlight today with our Autism Art Auction and all of the amazingly creative artists that have agreed to donate things to our auction. So thank you very much, John. I really appreciate your time. Thanks for filling us in on that very interesting segment. And we're going to take a break and show you some more of the art that's been donated to us. And then when we come back, we will speak to Anderson Todd, who is an enrichment educator. Stay tuned and thanks for tuning in.